I have a couple of comments. One is this, on the process. Notice the level of energy in the room. Everybody's pretty happy. It's kind of fun. Maybe? Okay, that's the kind of give and take that really helps in learning, is that this is dana, this is giving and taking. This is beautiful. Because you're giving to each other, I'm giving to you, and the flow of energy is really good. So when you, that's one of the reasons I like this pedagogy, is because people feel real energized, because they're applying it to themselves. That's a process comment about what we're experiencing, right? Now I'll give a content comment that I forgot. On virtue, I love the virtue ethics. How do you develop virtue? I forgot this little section. How do we develop these qualities of character? When you thought of those exemplars, those moral exemplars and the qualities they had, how do you think you develop those?
Yes, you develop virtue by forgetting yourself and seeing what's needed in the world and trying to cope with that as compassionate as possible. And it's a much better way than to sit down and think I have to better myself in this technique and that technique. And by forgetting yourself, it grows naturally from within outwards. For we have all the virtue within us.
Experience.
Right? But what about experience? What else goes
Knowing
on?
what doesn't work as well as what does work.
Okay. So putting it into action and seeing what works and what doesn't.
Seeing if you cause pain or receive pain.
Okay. Okay, I think there's lots of answers to this. And again, in a way I could say it is good to forget yourself and go ahead and do what's called for in the situation. But sometimes it's good to remember yourself. This is the nature of life, is like, it's like there's not just one answer. There's many answers. Like maybe, so you need to remember when you're lacking patience, or maybe, you need to remember that it's hard for you to finish something, and you're going to force yourself to the end to finish it, even though you don't want to.
Just the paradoxical loop is,
Yes.
How do you find self? By serving others. And how do you serve others? It's by finding self.
Exactly. There's a balance point there. Okay, I'm gonna suggest another, and this is not my idea, but it's obvious, is role modeling. So if you think about the people that inspire you or others to live up to the best in yourself, role models are one way we cultivate virtue. I want to be like H.P.B. I want to be like, look at those qualities. Look at the perseverance. I want to be like Martin Luther King. I don't know if you ever heard of the Peace Pilgrim. She's one of my favorites. I want to be like her. She used to sleep on the side of the road. She totally let go. She believed in life and let go and just trusted the process. Wow, I'm not quite there yet. But I'd like to be there. So it's our role models that inspire us also. It's another way that we cultivate that, because it brings out the best in us. We get that inspiration, divine inspiration, is what helps us to try harder, to give it a shot in terms of trying something we haven't done before, or learning from experience, are these role models.
I was thinking, do I want to be as, what you say, Gandhi, or you mention all those names? Isn't that then focusing on a result? I want to be that person. I want to be the process. I want to be the path. I think is that for me more important.
Yeah, you could focus on the result, but what you really want to emulate the kind of person that's the virtue part. If you want to say, well, I want to have the perseverance that Gandhi had to follow through on this. And by the way, there's always two sides to that. Because somebody is going to call you stubborn when you're perseverant. And you know what? It's two sides of the same coin, if you think about it. So it's not just, so virtue has two sides. You see what I'm saying?
But
He was pretty stubborn. He was also pretty harsh to his family. And actually his family suffered a lot from his sternness. But what was his sternness about? He had tremendous discipline. A very disciplined people who achieve a lot are often very harsh. Mother Teresa used to tell her nuns, you know, leave your ego at the door. She was really tough. And so is any great leader who's that tough is going to have a harsh side. Is going to come off maybe. So I'm saying that virtue is not always easy to see as a pure thing. It's got many sides to it. But if he didn't have the perseverance, he could never do what he did. So this isn't about the result. It's more about what it is that people do that make you admire them and say, whoa, when I get in that situation, I like to have that fortitude to follow through or this or that. But if it comes to the result, there again, I believe in paradox. Sometimes you need to be concerned with the results. On the other hand, if you're absolutely can't deal with anything else but results, then you're kind of missing the point too, because we say with the Bhagavad Gita, right? Do your action, don't worry about the results. It's all like true. All of that is true. But don't be too absolute about any of it. Because life's this process. We like to say, oh, I got it now. I got the truth. It's in this box. I know just what to do. I didn't like that. It's a flow. So maybe it'll work here, but maybe we do have to consider the results of how this is going to come out, but not get hung up on it, not get addicted to it, not get, what the Buddhists say, attached or have a craving about it's got to go my way. On the other hand, you better be a little concerned about the results. We were trying to get here this morning, and Jerry and I were hopelessly lost. And we don't have a GPS, time to get one. And I don't know, we got here somehow. And then, boy, we better be concerned about the results. Oh, who cares, you get there, you get there. Well, not quite, So we got here, we're here. But I'm just saying, life is like that edge, it's that edge. Yeah, be concerned about the results, but don't be too concerned. Don't be too absolute about it, Because that's what makes you righteous. And when you get righteous, you start doing stuff to people and yourself. It's like that humility. You talk about humility. I think somebody mentioned humility. That's a great, wonderful virtue. Remember humility? I think it's great. But you can also, humility can be, you can, put yourself down too much. And then you don't have any power to change anything. There is power, You got to acknowledge it and say, well, what can I do with it? So I'm just saying, it's riding the surf. It's riding that wave. And therefore, there's no formula. It's all coming together. And the formula is you.
May I give a reaction? If in fact you say you can admire someone, but you don't want to be a copy of someone.
Yes.
But if you take the virtues as a start,
exactly.
then you can also say if you concentrate on the 12 paramitas, then you have all the virtues you need to develop.
Great.
And then then you can look after persons that have developed it, but not take the person that you want to be a copy of it, because you are unique, so you have to go your own path.
Right. You have to be your own path. That's great. I love that. That's really good. One more, and then we're going to go make a switch here. Not too much, though.
I kind kind of just wanted to make a comment on self-sacrificing.
Okay.
Many, many, many moons ago, I watched the movie Gorillas of the Mist,
Yes.
about the lady that went and contributed to life. And the person that I went with to see the movie said, "What a sacrifice." And I said, "I don't think so. Because when you find what your soul is fallen in love with, it's not a sacrifice." So I think it's like taking all the parts that Joanna was speaking about. When those come into kind of a tumbler, poof, you know what to do. And that's true with small things. So the word sacrifice in this day and age, or maybe in our utilitarian way of living, sounds like you give up something.
Yeah.
But it's not. It's kind of it's where all that prana just clicks.
It's where,
Yeah.
it's what needs to be done.
Yeah, but also you feel like you feel joyful because you feel like it's almost like, God, I'm so lucky. But it's not about giving up.
Right. And speaking of that, we of course could spend, and I'd like to see this happen, we could spend our whole seminar on H.P.B's ethics. So I'm saying that because we're going to hit some highlights here. And I would like to write a book on H.P.B's ethics. But that takes perseverance, commitment, dedication, time. So I have to carve that out for that to happen. But I started to kind of research. This is just a few things that I think really embody some of the components we talked about. So as I talk about them, maybe we can think of examples of ways that we have tried to live these ethics, or what they mean to us. So I always love this quote from that little book, Practical Occultism, that H.P.B has. "It's easy to become a Theosophist. Any person of average intellectual capacities and a leaning toward the metaphysical, a pure, unselfish life, who finds more joy in helping his neighbor than receiving help himself, who is ever ready to sacrifice his own pleasures for the sake of other people, and who loves truth, goodness, and wisdom for their own sake and not for the benefit they confer, is a Theosophist." Isn't that cool? I think it's great. So some people are Theosophists and they don't know it. And some people who think they are a Theosophist need to read this. So what are some of the values and principles that she's referring to in here? You see how they're implied? They may look obvious, but what values and principles do you see in here? Obviously, what's the biggest principle? What she's saying, if you're willing to actually give more to others than yourself, that's that altruism, right? Right? And I have a little bit more on altruism, and we can talk about that after what Phyllis said on altruism. But you're actually willing to put yourself out for people when you see they have a need. What else? What other principles or values do you see in here? Truth, goodness, and wisdom. If you love to quest after that, she's saying, it's an open inquiry. What's really true about life? It's open-ended. There's no end to that. Goodness, when you see something good really happen and you're filled with joy for someone else. Wisdom. Wow, this, doing the thing that really fits at the time. It's really good. Okay. So you can see embedded in a statement like this are principles, values, and even statements or standards about how to be and how not to be. That's part of the moral code. Pretty central. Let's see, can I get Cindy, will you read in the key, nice and loud? And here, you want to give her read in the key, the next one.
In the Key to Theosophy, H.P.B says, "A true Theosophist pledges oneself to a life of altruism, One has to work to bring the divine self to guide every thought and action. A true Theosophist ought to deal justly and walk humbly.
What do you think about that? What are some of the values and principles in there? Humble, humility, we mentioned. Walk justly, treating all people fairly. That implies like standing up for people when they're being maligned or exploited. Right? And this alchemical process to bring the divine self to guide every thought and action. I think that's tough. That goes back to motive. We were talking about motive. You came up and talked to me about motive. Being aware in yourself of what's going on. Sometimes you're not aware until you do something, and then you go back and reflect on it, which is a great learning tool, as you said, by experience. How do we learn? We make a lot of mistakes. Nothing's a mistake if you learn from it. Although life might be a little harder when you don't use any discrimination, or a lot harder. So motive is important in being altruistic, and also this wisdom to do what needs to be done in the situation. Plato might say, you know, the harmony of the soul. That is to say, bringing harmony to the situation. Different ways to put it. How do you do that? Well, this is a great article. I think it's in the Collected Writings. It's volume 8, and it's a great article. It's called "Let Each Man Prove His Own Work," and it's really worth a read in terms of H.P.B. Let's see, can I get a volunteer to read that quote? It's a pretty famous quote, actually. Go ahead, Dan. Give it to us.
He who does not practice altruism, he who is prepared to share his last morsel, who is not prepared to share his last morsel with a weaker or poorer than himself, he who neglects to help his brother man, should say of whatever race, nation, or creed, whenever and wherever he meets suffering, and who turns a deaf ear to the cry of human misery, who hears an innocent person slandered, whether a brother Theosophist or not, and does not undertake his defense as he would undertake his own, is no Theosophist.
That's pretty heavy. She's really socking it to us, you know. That's a tough standard to live up to, really. I think it's our prejudices come in, our preferences, our, come on, I don't want to do this, you know. And also our mistakes about thinking we're helping someone when maybe we're not, because we don't have the wisdom to actually do the right thing. And I'm going to get into that a little bit later, but those two ideas, right motive and right knowledge, are the keys to this article, which is really worth reading. Because she has, I'll get to it when I get to this phrase. Well, in fact, not being a linear person. Look at the next page. I'm going to go to 3 right away and come back. And how is one to practice altruism? And H.P.B. says in that article, well, we need 2 things. We need the right motive, but we also need right knowledge. Okay, and how do we do that? And let's see, can I get a volunteer to read the next paragraph?
While we are bound to help one another as much as possible, each person is responsible for his or her own evolution. This, it is an inexorable law. Man lifts himself by degrees from the state of a beast to the glory of a god. Do our acts lead a person to become more responsible and self-sufficient, or do we reinforce dependence and self-pity?
Heavy duty in that. So we could ask ourselves, is what we're doing helping that person to develop? Or are we actually getting in their way because maybe we're doing it for them? We can do too much for people, right? I know I had, I remember a friend of mine had a relative who was addicted to drugs. And after years of trying to, bailing them out and trying to do this and that. Finally, the person decided, my friend decided, I'm not helping. You know, in fact, I'm reinforcing it. So basically, she told her brother, you need help, and I can't help you. So I'm not going to keep taking you in. Things go bad. I'm not going to bail you out. I'm not going to pay for this and that. You're going to have to take responsibility and do it yourself. Big risk there, because the person might not change. It might get worse, so that's the hook. The hook is if I don't save them, maybe they'll do themselves in. But that's where they have to take the responsibility. So self-responsibility is a big ethic in Theosophy. That it's up to each of us to actually evolve in this life and learn in this life. So when we're trying to help people, we have to ask ourselves, is what I'm doing creating more dependency, or is it helping the person to be self-reliant and more responsible as a human being? Those are tough questions. We're not always right. We might be wrong. But over time, as we learn, try it out. And we learn what helps and what doesn't help. And then, do you want to read the next paragraph?
H.P.B. warns, it takes a very wise man to do good works without danger of doing incalculable harm. One indeed might have a benevolent motive.
A good motive.
Okay, as soon as he begins to understand what a friend and teacher pain can be. The Theosophist stands appalled before the mysterious problem of human life, and though he may long to do good works, equally dreads to do them wrongly until he himself acquired greater power and knowledge.
So how do we act wisely? So I think it's through observation of ourselves and others, a reflection process, being open to our experiences and what we learn from them, what's helpful, what's not helpful. We begin to trust our intuition and hear that still, small voice within, the voice of the silence, that divine impulse. But our intuition, I would say, needs to be checked by reason, because sometimes we can confuse our feeling with our intuition. We can think that our feelings are coming from a higher state when maybe they're just coming from our conditioned self. So we have to be humble about it, going back to humility. Where are we coming from? So reason gives us the ability to reflect on what's happened and in fact see whether or not that was a wise approach, or perhaps we could deceive ourselves and think we're doing something helpful when we're not. But here's what I'm saying. It's about being open to change. It's about being humble about an attitude about who you are. And it's actually kind of an adventure. You know, it's an adventure when you look at it that way. It's like, wow, what's going to happen next? You know, whoa, what can I learn from this? What kind of day is it going to be? Well, can I see each opportunity in life as an event for learning and an event for helping? And then as you do that process, you mature and grow in your wisdom. And I use the example, one of our presidents, Lyndon Johnson, back in the 60s, 70s. Of course, he was fighting the Vietnam War, but the other thing he was doing was trying to minimize poverty in this country. And he put into effect the Great Society program, and he did a lot of really wonderful things. He had job training for people. He had preschool programs that are rapidly evaporating now, as if we ever had them. But he did do some things, and he meant to do well, that were also problematic. one big thing he did was he decided that people who lived in slums in the cities would be better off if they completely leveled the slums and put high-rise apartments with parks for that would be clean and nice neighborhoods. It seemed like a good idea, doesn't it? Doesn't it? That's because you know too much. Because what did he eliminate by doing that? Neighborhoods. He eliminated community. So even though the material conditions were really bad, that's where people had strong bonds of loyalty and love for each other. And when he tore all that down, not he, but the policy that tore it down, meaning to do good, created high-rise projects that became the basis for gang warfare, more poverty, lack of community. He wanted us to do good. But now, a more effective approach is to say to the people when they live in an area, what do you think we ought to do to improve the area? See the difference? So it's that old adage, if you give a person a fish, they live for a day, and if you teach them to fish, then they survive a whole life, right? So the idea then is how can you help people be more self-sufficient? So if you come in and you be patronistic to them and say, I'm going to show you how to do this, does that teach people to be more self-sufficient? But if you come into people and say, let's plan this together and let's figure out what works and doesn't work, are you respecting their own dignity and helping them to problem solve the situation? So I have a background in social work. I learned that kind of the hard way through all this experience, that doing good to people can create dependency if you're not able to involve them in being self-sufficient at the level that they can, in fact, operate at. But then that takes discrimination to figure that out. So I wanted to give you an example of that idea of the right motive, but perhaps not very wise knowledge. So what she's suggesting here is both. And how do you get the right knowledge? It's a learning process. So can you think, maybe you can talk with your partner for a minute of any ways you learned right knowledge in your own life, any examples that over time, through your own experience, where you did something that was helpful to people and you learned from that it was actually very beneficial to them, or maybe didn't, and learned from that. Maybe I should just make that a general comment.
May I add a general remark?
Yeah.
You are completely right about the right motive and the right knowledge. And
thanks.
Yeah, because we are talking a lot about the masters, and they are the masters of wisdom and compassion. And wisdom refers to the right knowledge, and compassion to the right motive.
Yes.
So you see that developing the combination of the right knowledge and the right motive is essential to be a Theosophist.
Yes, I think so. So I think one thing, we have a lot of words here today, but one thing, if you could take from this and remember to consider your motive and consider what the helpful thing to do is in a situation. And many of you have given, or several of you have given really good guidelines for how to think about that. I think you said bringing harmony. Somebody said, how can I bring harmony to the situation? That's one thing you can ask yourself. Maybe you can think of another question when it comes up that helps to lead you to think about what's going to work out best. You had one too, didn't you?
It's so easy. Everyone here knows it. When there's a conflict in your environment, in the situation where you are, then you can become passive and not doing something. You can take sides, and that is the Raja's way, but you can rise above the conflict And that's the Sattva way. And then you can teach others by example how to rise above their own conflict. Because both sides, most of the time, have their own illusion of the situation. And you can help people rise above their illusion without any time condemning them and accusing them and saying they're wrong. They only have to rise above the situation. And you always can help people with that. But
that's great. But not so easy when your buttons get pushed. I think it's a great way to think about it. And it's exactly those buttons, though. I want to defend the buttons. It's the obstacles in us. It's the shadow side. It's the egotistical elements that are the fodder for growth. It's, we always think, I don't want to look at that, But that's exactly what life's about, is in fact seeing, oh, wow, I didn't realize I was so intolerant. That's important for me to realize. I wonder why that is. Oh, my dad was like that. Oh, my mom was like that. So you begin to kind of see the connections to your own obstacles, and then you have a chance to work them through. I think there's a tendency, I have it, to want to be at that impersonal level without really admitting who you really are. And that where you really make the progress is when you're humble and open enough to say, whoa, look at that in me. I didn't think I had that. Oh, it's there. And then I find it's a really good idea not to get into a fight with it. A wrestling match with something in yourself you don't like. Okay? So maybe, let's see if I can think of an example of myself. Oh, I heard her little, you have one?
What does it look like? Wrestling match with something inside yourself?
Yeah.
I'm just curious. No, for me it's a question as well. So I'm hoping somebody comes up with an example.
Look at that metaphor. You remember in Star Wars when Luke was getting initiated by Yoda, and he went in the cave and he saw his father, and he started wrestling with his father. He was really wrestling with that part of himself, and he wanted to push his Darth Vader away. I'm not related to him. It's my dad, but I'm not related to him. There's a lot of parts of ourselves we don't want to admit. And so mythology is a really great vehicle to see the shadow parts of ourselves that we get in conflict with, or we want to deny so we don't have to get in a conflict with.
That's got to be the wrestling match.
That's the
denial part.
Yes, the denial part.
And maybe as well, we always know the right decision to make, but sometimes it's just a bit too hard.
Yes.
That's not a wrestling match.
And I find, maybe this would fit with Joanna here, that when I see a part of myself, let's see, something I worked on for a long time, when I'm let's say, attached to, it's being over-responsible and having that idealized self. Let's say in my work situation, when I teach in a graduate program, and I have the tendency to take the burden of the whole program on myself and say, oh, well, people are retiring, whatever, I can't let that program fail, so I'll keep teaching and I'll keep doing this stuff. And so this year I decided, no, I'm going to start cutting back and going half-time, and I'm not going to save the program. I'm going to let other people save the program. And they are. They are. Because I got out of my way and I let them. So, but I knew that I had that tendency to do that, to try to save it. So I said, okay, I could even renege on my semi-retirement, go back and try to teach because we're short on people. And then I said, I'm not very good at this. I got real stuck. That nice divine intuition wasn't happening. So I said, okay, I'm going to talk to all my friends. And they said, are you crazy? Don't go back on your retirement. And I says, yeah, I really don't want to. And so I got help. And I was able to say, I'm letting it go. I'm feeling pretty good. And by the way, they're doing a really good job of saving this program. And if they don't, you know what? Time to change. Right? It's real hard. I'm just giving you an example of one of my hang-ups. And it comes from an over-idealized sense of self. So I know that about me. And I know sometimes I can't trust my own intuition. So maybe I'll go ask for help. And say, what do you think? I need some advice from my friends. I get by with a little help from my friends. What are you going to say?
One thing, I'm not so good at it, but Herman always say, a good leader goes behind the people, that's the Tao Te King, not to walk, how do you say that in English? In front of their feet, not to let them stumble over the leader, you know, and that is the way he works, and it works better than my way, you know.
Now don't be too self-effacing. Any other examples we can think of? Oh, good. Phyllis has one in the back.
Here's another thing I think that we misinterpret because of the stage we're at, I'm going to say. For one thing, words, language, objective language is utilitarian in the fact that we're going to move out of it. It's a product of Manus as we know it, the mind and mostly the linear intellectual mind. But there'll be a point in time where you read from another way, one to the other, in the other. But there's a wonderful story, you know, we've all read The Key to Theosophy probably, but she quotes Edward Bellamy.
Mm-hmm.
And he had written another story called To Whom This May Come, if anyone's read it. If you haven't, please do. It's about a time in the future when they don't use language because they all know how to read the hearts of others. And language isn't needed because it shrinks the subjective part of ourselves. And that's what an ideal can do. An ideal's out there, and when we try it on, we may be pushing those things that we haven't growth is natural, that becomes shoved into the ideal or into the word, but they're not really in this other nature. It's not good or bad, I don't mean that, but I just think that we're really limited, particularly the English language, you know, because it's commercial. So that's all.
And many times we mistake the language for the thing in itself, right? We mistake the finger for the moon, right? We point to the moon, but we think it's the moon. Or we say, how many millions of people have gotten killed over the word God? It's just a word. I think it was Joseph Campbell who said something like he couldn't believe all the kind of amount of murder that went on in the name of God in 3 different titles. It's just a word. But we kill each other over that language. So we have to see beyond that and get deeper. Another thing. Oh, good. Richard.
I think, there's so many mistakes I've made. It would take all day to list them all, so I'm not going to get through each individual ones. But the bottom line is I think one of the best ways to learn compassion is to realize how many mistakes you've made. And I can honestly say I've tried many times to do the right thing, but so many times I've made mistakes. Okay. And this one thing, I think, helps me more than anything else to show compassion for people, because I think everybody's pretty much in the same picture.
Yeah.
And it allows you to be very tolerant to the difference of opinion, as you were saying about God, et cetera, and just look at yourself. Mm-hmm. And how many times I've been tempted to say, oh, please just tell me what to do. You know, if someone could just tell me, that really knows, the master, whoever,
right.
Just tell me what to do on all these things.
But of course you can't do
You
that.
can't do it.
But again, this is probably one of the best things to consider, to be compassionate and understanding and tolerate people.
And at the same time, we're put in that paradoxical mode where we have to act. And we have to take the risk to act often and be willing to make mistakes. But the situation calls for us to do it. It's really important. Well, there's this wonderful Zen story about the samurai warrior who, there was a war and he was basically going to kill his enemy. And so he came to the enemy and he raised his sword up and he realized the vengeance in his heart, dropped the sword and left. Because he realized his motive. He realized the motive in himself. He was attached. He was attached to that anger that he couldn't do. Not that he should do anybody else in, but that in terms of the face of the enemy, he was coming from the wrong state of mind, the wrong state of being. So those are things we can look at with some humility, but we still have to act. I mean, we're forced to act. We have families, we have the world, we have a situation where we have to take action. And we will make mistakes, and hopefully it will make us humble. But I think it is, she even says in the key, and I didn't write it down here, you can have the greatest motive and thoughts in the world, but she's got this great phrase where she says, I say action, and I mean action, is the end result of your ethics. It's not enough to have the right motive and think about it. You have to take the action. And that's where the risk is. Because, of course, we may do things that later on we see we could have done better. But that's how we learn. And that's part of being the human condition. So going back to the other page on the ethics of H.P.B, let me just cover a few of these. In the Paramitas. The Key is a wonderful, book on ethics. I mean, it's just full of principles and values and what it means to be a Theosophist and try to lead a Theosophical life. And here we have it, she says, under 2, we have the altruism, ethics of altruism. And she says, what is that? What constitutes that? She says, duty. We have a responsibility to work for the good of humanity and for those poor or more helpless than ourselves, and to seek justice or a full measure of equal rights and privileges for all. Boy, that sounds like Martin Luther King to me. So that whole idea of all people having the same dignity and rights is, what else is brotherhood about? This self-sacrifice, again, we've spent some time on this, putting others before yourself, but notice she says it must be done with wisdom and by doing justice to oneself as part of humanity. It's pretty interesting. So we have to consider ourselves in the matrix. Charity, generosity of spirit in showing personal kindness. And we can do that in very small but meaningful ways every day with people. And I see it all the time. I see people doing it all the time. Being attentive to what people need. And responding on that level. And then she has this list of ethical standards. Again, they're statements or conduct. What to do and what not to do. I like this one. Refrain from living a frivolous life. Work for those who you can help. If you're in a pretty good financial situation at the end of your life, you can basically kind of go through that and sort of not hurt anybody, but not do very much. And she says if you're really committed to this Theosophical life, you're always going to be working in some kind of capacity, no matter what condition you're in, how old you are, to do something helpful. And if you have that obsession, then you have the Theosophical spirit. Avoid slandering others and demand proof when encountering gossip. Act justly. This gossip thing is a big thing because we tend to do it to each other. And then if you kind of watch yourself, you find out, just watch yourself when you have a tendency to be critical or put somebody down, how your ego feels when you put somebody down. It feels a little more superior, actually. So the ego gets kind of a rush out of slandering others. And at the same time, when people are unjustly treated, she says, paradoxically, we should, in fact, try to stand up for the person to be fair because the other person is being hurt. Do not place great value on personal progress, but practice altruistic conduct. So there we go to the result, right? Because what is it that needs the result in yourself? Oh, I'm such a good person. I'm really making spiritual progress. Wow, I've coordinated, 5 workshops in the last ethics workshops especially. So that's all ego. Okay, and I like the humor part because you can kind of laugh at your ego. When you see yourself, you can kind of smile and say, "Oh, there it is." You don't have to act on it, but you can see it when you're doing it. Avoid placing personal vanity above the good of others. Recognize your faults, praise others for their efforts, forgive others for their shortcomings. Forgiveness. Because in the end, when you forgive, who are you forgiving? Because when you're angry, you're carrying that around all the time. And you may be unjustly treated. But if you can get to the point of caring enough for yourself to forgive yourself, then you're not carrying that karma around. Okay, and then the virtues, which we have talked about on the next page. Again, these come straight from the Voice, and the Voice was a Buddhist manual for actually living virtue ethics, which is made up of motive and these qualities. So we could spend a nice workshop on each of these wonderful. And I think that you said if you get to the last, wisdom, you've really incorporated all of them. As you work on one, you work on all of them. And maybe you don't have to work on it, but maybe it's not such a bad thing to recognize, oh, I am a lot more calm than I was 5 years ago because I'm not taking things so seriously. I'm just doing my best. And in the end, I sort of think peace of mind comes from living every moment the best you can and learning from it and moving on. And when karma comes around that maybe isn't so positive, go, well, I turn to learn from this stuff. One of my friends said, not another darn learning experience. I don't want it. But we all have it, don't we? So the section I didn't get to do, and my classes are 3 hours long, so if we had 3 hours, I'd do it, is applying ethics to, on the last page, to moral problems. But you can look at this yourself and sort of think about it. I try to teach this model to my students, and I realize it's coming from Manas, but it could be informed by Buddhimanas. And I find sometimes when you sit with things and try not too hard to force a solution, but think it through with reason, sometimes, as Clancy Mackenzie pointed out, you get an answer. You kind of get an answer about what you need to do. But it's always good to check it with reason. So your conscience, that divine part of yourself, you may be pretty clear, I need to do this. But also, when you're not sure what to do, or when you want to check it, this is, from a monastic point of view, I think not to be skipped. And one thing is, it's really good to get the facts of the situation. Our culture, I can say American culture, does not know the difference between facts and feelings. And if you feel it, it must be true. So a lot of misinformation and a lot of bigotry comes from a lack of understanding about what's really going on. So I can't say enough about getting the facts, but you're never going to know all the facts, right? So you make an earnest effort in every situation to really get the facts. And then if you can figure out what it is that's bothering you about the conflict. Do you feel like conflicted about being loyal as opposed to being truthful? Let's say in that case with the addiction that you have, your brother is addicted to something and you want to be helpful. You don't want to hurt them. You want them to be, but you want them to be self-sufficient, but maybe your conflict is a conflict between hurting them versus promoting their self-reliance. You know, so if you can figure out what's bothering you about the conflict, then you're in kind of a position to weigh it. Well, okay, I don't know whether I should not let him come to stay with me again after the 25th time and not taking any responsibility. What should I do here? I don't know. And there's no progress being made. We're stuck. Am I going to let him, am I going to say to him, I can't help you until you help yourself? That's one alternative. I could take him in. I could give him a number of a clinic, tell him he can go stay there and get some help. So you start to think of these options. It's a really good thing to do. And then you can say about the options, I like this one too. Can I be creative and use my moral imagination to think of a lot of options? I like moral imagination. Like, can I think out of the box? Well, I either help him or I don't help him. Well, maybe you can do like lots of other things. Like not let him stay with you, but think of 3 or 4 things that could be done otherwise. You see what I'm saying? So if you can be creative and not too judgmental about your ideas, about how to solve a certain kind of problem, sort of brainstorm on it and see if you can come up with some creative ways to think about it. And these are some good criteria to consider when the situation is tough. What are my obligations? Well, I have obligation to my brother. I have an obligation to see that he gets some help. I have an obligation to my family because he's real disruptive to my family and I need to take care of them too. I have obligation to myself. I have to keep my schedule up. I have to work. I have to do this. So you kind of, it gets you to think about what's involved. What are the ideals involved for me here? Well, helpfulness, self-sufficiency, let's see what else, the courage to do the right thing. That's going to be tough. And what consequences are going to come if I say to him, here's 3 options for you to stay and to get some help. Here's places you can go, but I can't help you anymore till you take some action and be responsible for yourself. Then at the end you can say, was that the most ethical decision? You can say, well, and I love this one, well, I have a moral hangover if I act this way. That's a really good one. You know, am I going to like be really upset about guilt? But then you got to kind of look at your guilt because maybe you could be guilty about anything forever. So, but a moral hangover, that's the conscience thing. That's really your conscience. Can I live with this? If I do this, can I live with this? And you might get to the point if you really work with somebody and they're not making any moves and they're not being self-sufficient or taking responsibility where you say, yeah, I can live with it. Because I've tried everything else. It's not working. So, all right, I'm going to do it. So it just helps you, it's a really good guide to help you think through things that come up. And if we had time, I would have, I work on a more specific example and then have you work on some problems and see what happens. So I think it would be a good idea if you come up with a problem that's really bothering you, don't throw away this little handout and get it out and sort of think it through. And I would say from a theosophical point of view to sit with the problem from a meditative point of view. That sometimes that higher manas will come through if you let it. If you let it come through. I saw. Go ahead.
It was a question. Maybe now it's a comment because I think we got it. I was wondering what you meant by moral imagination, but you just said something about sitting, contemplating, and letting the higher manas come through.
Yes,
Is that what you mean?
Yes, the intuitive part of yourself that if you let it will really generate a lot of ideas, and that's a good moral imagination. So if you get too critical about it and start analyzing it and saying, oh, I can't do that, then you kind of close it down. So it's a good idea to, before you analyze it, just to give yourself some room to let new ideas bubble up. And sometimes if you take a walk or you meditate or you get quiet, then the intuition comes through.
About 10 minutes ago we were talking about language, and I got the idea that it was said that it should always refer to the monastic aspect of the human consciousness. I think it is more complicated because word or language always refers to concepts. And if you, a concept can be also on the Buddhic level, monastic level,
yes.
and the other levels in human consciousness. So if you learn to read between the lines, as we call it, then you are appealing the Buddhic aspects. So I think we learn to think on the Buddhic level. So also if you take the paramitas, the 7 mentioned here, and you study them right, you activate your Buddhic level and not your monastic level. That is what I want to add.
I think it helps again to give some pause to that, so that I think meditation is a great opportunity to pause and let that, as you focus on those virtues, that you try not to think too hard about them, but that you remain one-pointed and just allow yourself to experience the intuition of it. Just allow it to come through. Sometimes the left brain works too hard on trying to make it happen, and then we kind of block that right brain intuitive side. There's a really great book, by the way, called about a woman who had a stroke. I think of it. And she actually was a neurosurgeon. And she described the stroke as she was experiencing it, and how she lost all her left brain functions. But as she did it, the right brain began to interconnect with everything. And she had this real spiritual experience. And she realized she could stay in that state. And then her mother helped her over a long, long period of time to regain her functions, so she could function from the left side of her brain. But she still retained the ability. That was an enlightenment experience, her stroke, to basically be open to that Buddhic connection and intuition, where she felt interconnected with everything. It was pretty cool. I'm trying to think of the name of that. I'll have to get that book and get it to you. Yes, yes.
Half-hour
yes.
video made about
Great. So I think I'll give it to Jerry, and Jerry, can you come up and make some comments and kind of wrap up? Okay. Break time.
Great. Thank you very much.